Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Good Lawyers Gone Bad podcast. My name is Stuart Teicher. Thank you to everyone who've been listening to the podcast so far. As you know, I just got started in this, and I think I've got a lot to learn. I've had some great comments from people. I've also had some really helpful criticisms. So thank you so much for those comments. I'll give you an example of one. Someone said that I end the stories too abruptly, and I need a bit of an outro to let everyone know that the actual episode is over. So I'm going to add that in today. If you have any questions or comments, I've got a website, Good Lawyers Gone Bad. You can put something in the Contact Us section. I'm on all of the different social medias, got a Facebook page, got an Instagram page, got a Twitter. I will not do TikTok. I have not been able to bring myself to go on that app yet. Not sure what you think about it. If you've got comments about TikTok, go to one of my other social media pages and let me know what you think about it. Today's episode is called The Judge Who Wouldn't Quit in More Ways Than One. If you've ever experienced a loved one dying of cancer, then you could understand what Sam Kent was going through. Sam's wife of over 30 years, Marianne, she got sick in 1995, and it pained him to watch what she went through. Accompanying her to doctor visits to deal with her brain cancer took a real toll on Sam. It made him more cynical. He started to see other people's problems as trivial. Other people's squabbles paled in comparison to what Sam and his wife were going through. Sam's wife suffered for 5 long years. And when Sam's wife ultimately and unfortunately passed away, Sam was sent into a tailspin. He plunged into a downward emotional spiral, and in 2000, Sam started drinking, and that habit picked up steam. He started drinking during the daytime and even on work days. Sam insisted that the drinking never got in the way of his job, but a new pattern of questionable behavior suggests otherwise. And it was around that time that Sam started to have some serious difficulties at his job. It's possible that the emotional trauma Sam felt from his wife's illness and untimely death is the reason that Sam started to act out at work. Of course, there's another explanation, one that's probably considered more likely by the people that Sam worked with. Sam Kent could have just been an asshole. Felicia Williams had a pretty good job. Being the case manager for a federal judge can be pressure-filled, but it has its perks. Sure, there are headaches when you have to maintain a court calendar, especially when lawyers are involved, because they're constantly asking for adjournments. Many of those requests are usually at the last minute as well. Dealing with lawyers' administrative issues is a constant hair is on fire experience. It's just the nature of the legal business. And there's far more to managing a court docket than just scheduling. There are documents to manage, discovery deadlines to monitor, and pretty much everything else that would be required to handle the administration of a busy court calendar. But there's also an upside. Judicial case managers don't get crapped on by lawyers a whole lot. A lot of administrators in the legal field are given a hard time by lawyers, but judicial case managers, well, not so much. And that's because the lawyers who interact with those administrators know that if you piss off the staff of a federal judge, there's a good chance you're going to be getting a call from their boss. They are not happy when you treat their staff poorly. And if you get on the wrong side of a federal judge, you could have a very difficult practice. Notice that I didn't say you could have a very difficult case. Sure, that's true. They could make your life difficult for that case. But judges don't forget what you did to their staff after a case is over. It gets imprinted on their brain, and they think of it every time they deal with you for the rest of your career. Felicia Williams admired her boss. The only problem was he made her feel uncomfortable. Judge Samuel B. Kent was a Texas man. He was a child of Colorado, having been born in Denver, but he came to Texas as a young man. Kent arrived at the University of Texas in Austin as an undergraduate in the late 60s, and he seems to have never turned back. He got his degree from UT in 1971, and then got his JD, his law degree, from the University of Texas in 1975. After graduating, Samuel Kent had a choice. He could have stayed in Austin or moved to Dallas or even another big Texas city like Houston. But instead of becoming a small fish in a big pond, Samuel Kent opted for the opposite. Samuel Kent decided to set up shop in Galveston, Texas. Galveston, Texas is only about an hour car ride southeast of Houston, but because it's located on a barrier island in the Gulf of Mexico, it has a very different atmosphere. When Samuel Kent arrived here in the early 1970s, Galveston had a unique blend of charm and character. As a coastal city, it had a relatively laid-back feel. The island's economy was heavily influenced by tourism, fishing, and shipping, but it hadn't yet fully transitioned into the bustling tourist destination that it would become later. There was a relatively slower pace to life. The downtown area featured historic buildings, and you could find local shops, local restaurants, and a close-knit community vibe. The beaches were popular, but they were less commercialized than they are today, so there was a more relaxed atmosphere. Overall, it was a time of quiet charm. In that smaller pond, Samuel Kent could make some waves. He could make some big waves for two reasons. First of all, he was one of the comparatively few members of a surely tight-knit legal community. But he also happened to be 6'4" tall and 260 pounds. There was no chance that Samuel Kent would be anything other than a big fish. Samuel Kent became a fixture in the Galveston legal world, practicing law for 15 years in the community. He focused on maritime law, which made sense given the fact that he was in a coastal community. After years of toiling in the practice on behalf of clients who were injured or killed at sea, in 1990, he hit pay dirt. It was that year that President George H.W. Bush appointed Samuel B. Kent to the federal bench. If you thought that being appointed to the federal bench in an outpost like Galveston, Texas, would make Judge Samuel Kent an even bigger fish in a small pond, you'd be wrong. Judge Samuel B. Kent wasn't a big fish. He was the only fish. Samuel B. Kent was the only federal judge in Galveston, Texas. Maybe it was his status as the veritable monarch of the local federal judiciary that caused Judge Kent to develop his reputation. He was known to be, shall we say, pushy. Why did Samuel Kent garner such a reputation? Well, sure, he was physically imposing. And sure, he kept a pet bulldog in his office. But his reputation was developed because of the brash and sometimes condescending way that he treated lawyers who appeared in his court. He was known to twist lawyers' arms when he thought they should settle, and some say he favored lawyers in his court who were part of his circle of friends. Judge Kent was known to exaggerate facts, make cynical jokes, and sometimes ridicule lawyers involved in the cases. Of course, not every lawyer disliked Judge Kent. Some felt that he ran a tight ship, that he efficiently moved along a complicated docket, and that he did so with a sense of humor. But humor is in the ear of the beholder, and some lawyers ended up on the sharp end of Samuel Kent's wit. Lawyers appearing before the judge were not so enamored with his amusing style when he would take potshots at them in legal opinions. Judge Kent's snarkiness actually made national headlines in 1997. A lawyer representing a large East Coast insurance company had a case in Judge Kent's Galveston court. He was frustrated, however, with the trek that he'd have to make from the airport in the metropolitan area of Houston all the way down to little old Galveston. When he asked the judge to transfer the case from Galveston to Houston, Judge Kent seemed to take it a little bit personally. He seemed insulted. In denying the transfer, Judge Kent wrote, quote, The defendant should be assured that it is not embarking on a 3-week-long trip via covered wagons when it travels to Galveston. Rather, defendant will be pleased to discover that the highway is paved and lighted all the way. And thanks to the efforts of this court's predecessor, the trip should be free of rustlers, hooligans, or vicious varmints of unsavory kind. Listen, being a sarcastic, pushy judge isn't so unusual. There are plenty of members of the judiciary who let the power go to their heads and end up behaving like jerks. But the criticism of Samuel Kent got far more concerning around the turn of the millennium. It might be because that's when his wife got sick. There's no way to know for sure. But it was in the year 2000 that the judge's case manager, Felicia Williams, started to feel uncomfortable. I mentioned earlier that the judge liked to have lunches with the lawyers that were in his good graces. And those lunches, well, they tended to grow a little bit longer. His drinking extended into the workday, and it became noticeable. That surely made Felicia apprehensive, but it was the judge's other behavior that seemed to cause genuine concern. Judge Kent began making lewd remarks around the office. For instance, when Felicia's husband was being treated for prostate cancer, the judge told her that he could service her. He started to tell dirty jokes and make rude comments about other people in Felicia's presence. Then, he started to ask for hugs from Felicia. And those requests grew more frequent. Felicia was feeling intense emotional pain as a result of all of this, but she never told anybody about the judge's behavior. She was afraid that he'd have her fired. In 2000, investigators started to ask questions, and one of the people they approached was Felicia Williams. It was dangerous for Felicia to say anything to investigators. The practice of law had a reputation for being somewhat of an old boys' club, and that reputation surely extended to the bench as well. Remember, Felicia's boss was the only federal judge in the Galveston area. If she spoke critically about him, there could be serious consequences. Well, things must have got pretty bad because Felicia decided to talk. She told investigators that the judge was harassing female employees and showing favoritism to lawyers. Well, the word on Judge Kent appeared to be out. Authorities didn't move overtly against him, but some subtle but powerful statements were being made. For instance, in 2001, the court made a very unusual move and abruptly reassigned 85 of Judge Kent's cases. The legal community was shocked. Transferring cases on that sort of scale was almost unheard of. But maybe they shouldn't have been so surprised by the order. The one thing that each of those cases had in common was that they all involved clients being represented by a lawyer who just happened to be Judge Kent's best friend. That same year, Kent was labeled a bully by the legal publication The Greenbag. The article claimed that Kent humiliated people in his courtroom. There's no way to know whether Judge Kent found out that Felicia Williams talked to investigators. There's a good chance that he had no idea, because Felicia continued to work for the judge for another year or so. But then, unknowingly, Felicia overstepped her bounds. One day, Felicia made what seemed to be a harmless comment about the judge being late. But that harmless comment turned out to be very painful, because in 2002, Felicia Williams lost her job. Sometimes people make decisions in the workplace that come back to haunt them. Sometimes we look back on a moment in our life and say, that was the decision that changed everything for me. In Samuel Kent's case, he probably wishes he never fired Felicia Williams. That's because if he would have kept Felicia on staff, Samuel Kent would never have met Kathy McBroom. Judge Kent hired Kathy McBroom as Felicia's replacement in September of 2002, and it didn't take too long for Samuel Kent to set his sights on his new case manager. About a year after Kathy started working for the judge, she found herself being summoned to the gym in their building. Well, calling it a gym might be much. There was an office in their building that was used as an exercise room, and Kathy was lured in there by the judge. And that's when Kathy found herself in the makeshift gym alone with her boss. Kathy, the case manager, stood in a converted fitness room next to her hulking 6'4", 260-pound boss, who happened to be one of the most powerful humans in all of Galveston, Texas. And that's when it happened. Kathy McBroom says Judge Kent took advantage of her. He groped her right there in the exercise room. Kathy apparently scurried out of the room, surely devastated by what had happened. She must have been absolutely shocked. How else could she feel? She probably felt violated, devastated, and demoralized. The next days must have been a roller coaster of emotions for Kathy McBroom. She must have been torn apart. Her boss, a federal judge, had touched her. She must have wanted to shout about it from the rooftops. She needed to let the world know what a man in an incredible position of power had just done to her. But therein lied the problem. Judge Samuel Kent was just that, a man with a tremendous amount of power. And that put Kathy in a terrible bind. On one hand, Kathy had to say something, didn't she? How do you let someone get away with that sort of repulsive behavior? It's just not right. And think about what could happen in the future if she kept her mouth shut. It might send a dangerous signal. Judge Kent might see that as an opening to try something similar in the future. According to Kathy, Judge Kent had already proved himself to be a vulgar risk-taker. Just look what happened in the gym. Who knows what the judge could be capable if he felt empowered by her silence? Kathy couldn't just leave herself vulnerable like that, could she? But then there was the other hand, the practical reality. It was her word against his. There was nobody else in the room with them. It was the word of a court staffer versus the word of a respected jurist who was appointed to his position by the President of the United States. Wasn't a local mayor, wasn't a governor. No, he was put in that job by the actual President of the United freaking States. Who the heck is she to take on someone with that sort of power? And even if she did, wouldn't everyone just take the judge's side? I mean, isn't that how these kinds of power dynamics work? And what if they did take his side? Well, in that case, Kathy would probably be out on her behind. If she told anybody what happened, she would end up like Felicia Williams, out of a job. And case manager jobs in the federal court system in the Galveston area, well, they don't exactly grow on trees. Actually, since Judge Kent was the only federal judge in the Galveston area, there are no other federal case manager jobs in the area. Heck, Felicia Williams ended up having to relocate to Houston after the judge fired her. If Kathy opened her mouth, she could be in the same predicament. The decision must have gnawed at Kathy. She must have gone back and forth over the scene in her mind. She said that a federal judge had violated her. If so, then he deserved to be turned in. And you know what? Kathy's supervisor was a woman. That commonality had to stand for something, right? So Kathy made up her mind. She decided to risk it, and she reported the event to her supervisor. It did not go as she had hoped. Instead of championing her cause, Kathy's supervisor gave her a warning. If she made a formal complaint, her supervisor said, Kathy was probably going to lose her job. The supervisor revealed that there were other female employees who apparently also experienced the judge's bad behavior. But it seemed that no one made any complaint official. In the end, Kathy McBroom would do the same thing. She didn't make any formal complaint, and no action was taken. The entire event was swept under the rug. The next 4 years must have been torture for Kathy McBroom. Imagine how difficult it would be for someone to show up to work and spend every day facing a person who physically assaulted you and got away with it. To make matters worse, Kathy said the judge's behavior didn't change at all. She said there were over a dozen different instances of harassment and that it went on for years. According to Kathy, the simmering pot that was Samuel Kent boiled over in March of 2007. She told her side of the story to a reporter, Lise Olson of the Houston Chronicle. She said on March 27th, Judge Kent took one of his typical long lunches with members of the bar. When he got back to the court, he was apparently drunk. Judge Kent admitted that he drank during the day sometimes, though he had always maintained that it never affected his work. This time, however, the alcohol must have made him feel particularly affectionate, because at around 3 p.m. that day, he called Kathy McBroom into his office. Kathy responded obediently, entering the judge's office with her hands full of legal papers. Kathy sized up her boss, and he seemed to be drunk. And that is when the judge's affections came out. Judge Kent asked Kathy for a hug. Given their interactions in the past, Kathy must have been apprehensive, to put it mildly. She must have thought, this is not going to go well. Kathy wasn't interested in hugging the judge, but the last time she complained about inappropriate behavior went nowhere. So even though she didn't feel a hug was appropriate, she reluctantly and most likely dutifully approached her boss. But that's when Kathy learned that this time, the judge wasn't just looking for a hug. The judge grabbed at Kathy aggressively and pulled her sweater up. She dropped the papers that were in her hands. The judge's bulldog started to bark. The judge tugged at her sweater, exposing Kathy's bra. Kathy struggled with the man, who was significantly bigger and physically stronger. As Kathy tried to resist, the judge yanked at her bra, baring her breast, and then he thrust his face into her chest and put his mouth on her breast. Kathy must have been in shock. Her mind must have been racing. In what must have felt like a whirlwind of violence, the judge then rose up and grabbed Kathy by the head. Judge Kent pulled Kathy's head down and forced her head towards his crotch. And all the while, the judge was telling Kathy the perverse things he wanted to do to her. At that moment, thankfully, a colleague walked by the judge's door, and when Samuel Kent heard the footsteps, he let go of Kathy. But he continued to make sexually suggestive comments to her. Kathy ran out of the room crying and shaken. Kathy told her mother what happened. She even told Felicia Williams. The two women had maintained contact over the years and became friends. Felicia must not have been surprised, given what she knew about the judge's behavior from her tenure at his court. Kathy also confided in a close friend and explained everything in great detail. The entire event was apparently so violent that her friend was convinced the police would have been involved were the perpetrator not a powerful federal judge. At that point, Kathy withdrew from life. She skipped her own child's birthday party and just retreated from life. She went to live with her mother for a while as she sorted things out. She was having a difficult time just dealing with the daily parts of life, and she certainly couldn't bear to be in Judge Kent's courtroom anymore. Almost immediately after the attack, she put in for a transfer to Houston. But this time, Kathy McBroom was not going to go down quietly. She was not going to slink away to Houston in silence. This time, she filed a complaint against Judge Kent. The investigation into the judge would be spearheaded by the chief judge of the Fifth Circuit Court. The process was multi-tiered. A 3-judge panel from the Fifth Circuit Court would issue findings. Those findings would be delivered to a 19-person council that was made up of other judges from the region, and that council would then decide whether to issue discipline on Judge Kent. At first, there seemed to be a little movement. Just after Kathy filed her complaint, there was another mass reassignment of Judge Kent's cases. In May of 2007, dozens of cases that were pending before Samuel Kent were once again assigned to other judges. Unlike the 2001 incident, however, this time the court gave a reason. What was the reason? Workload concerns. Seriously? Workload concerns? Of course, the fact that the Fifth Circuit Court just opened an investigation into the very judge presiding over all of those cases, well, that could have been the reason for the reassignment, don't you think? But oh no, that's not what the court said. They said it was a workload concerns. If one thought that the reassignment of those cases was the first swing of the hammer being dropped on Judge Kent, one would be wrong. Instead, it was an ominous indication of what was to come. The process that followed must have infuriated Kathy McBroom, because the reality is the Fifth Circuit Court's investigation was a joke. The court started by hiring a law firm to gather the facts for their investigation. They needed someone to actually gather those facts. But instead of finding a detached, neutral firm to engage in that fact-finding, they hired a law firm who had actually practiced before Judge Kent. In addition, that firm seemed to be unqualified for the job because they had never actually conducted an investigation into any matters involving sexual harassment in the workplace. On top of that, the spin machine then went to work. First, it was the judge himself that tried to direct the narrative, so to speak. During the investigation, Judge Kent sought understanding. He acknowledged that he had problems. He claimed that he was a mess after his wife died. He admitted that he developed a drinking problem which led to weight gain and diabetes. And when the investigation asked Judge Kent about the alleged sexual abuse, he flat out denied it. The Spinmeisters were also telling their tales to the public. Lawyers who appeared before Judge Kent in the past contacted members of the media to stand up for the judge. And their attack? Stereotypical. There was victim blaming combined with stalwart support for a powerful jurist. Prominent attorneys contacted journalists insisting that Samuel Kent was innocent. They trashed Kathy McBroom, calling her, quote, a well-known flirt. Even Judge Kent's lawyer would claim that the interaction was, as he put it, enthusiastically consensual. Judge Kent played along, vehemently maintaining his innocence. He told the media, quote, as with every human controversy, there are absolutely two sides to this one, and I will vigorously present mine at the appropriate time. The entire effort seemed like an elaborate attempt to protect Judge Samuel Kent. It was tough to think otherwise, and the results of the court's investigation sort of confirmed that. When the firm hired by the court finally reached a conclusion and issued a report to the 3-judge panel, the report was withheld from the public. The reviewing panel of judges then issued recommendations to the 19-person council. They were secret recommendations. And the 19-person council then met in secret to review those findings. The result? A paltry sanction. The Fifth Circuit Judicial Council issued a reprimand and suspended Judge Kent for a whopping 4 months. That's basically a mild slap on the wrist, discipline-wise. And the slap, it didn't even sting that much, because the 4-month suspension, it was paid leave. And to make matters even worse, Judge Kent, he'd be eligible to return to the bench after his 4-month suspension was over. And that is exactly what happened. After serving his 4-month suspension, Samuel Kent was transferred to Houston and resumed his duties as a federal judge. With all of this happening, you'd think that maybe the U.S. attorney would pursue criminal charges. No dice. There was nothing. The only grumbling from anyone was a couple of members from the U.S. House Judiciary Committee who wanted to investigate whether Kent should be impeached. Remember, he was a federal appointee, which meant that to get him off the bench, he had to actually be impeached by Congress. So there were a few people in Washington starting to make noise about that, but they were just grumbling and nothing more. And that would have been the end of it. It all would have petered out and been swept under the rug again. It all would have led to nothing, and Kathy McBroom would have had justice denied one more time. That is, if it weren't for a tenacious lawyer and an equally tenacious journalist. Kathy McBroom hired counsel to help her throughout this entire fiasco. Her lawyer, Rusty Hardin, was a legend in the Galveston area. Rusty Hardin was not about to let this end the way it was appearing to end. He felt so strongly about the matter that he represented Kathy McBroom for free. Hardin wasn't about to accept the Fifth Circuit's shoddy investigation, so he got his own investigator involved. His own investigator tracked down witnesses. His own investigator gathered other evidence. And when he finally compiled all that stuff, he turned it over to federal authorities. In addition to all of his efforts, there was reporting from the Houston Chronicle. You recall earlier that I mentioned Lise Olson, who was a journalist for the Chronicle. She had been researching and reporting on the Kent matter for some time. In November of 2008, many months after Judge Kent returned to work, her newspaper published details of the fiasco. And it was because of the publicity created by her reporting, combined with the information that the lawyer turned over to the feds, that the FBI finally opened an investigation. Once the investigation was open, prosecutors got on the case. They brought in a special crew from the Public Integrity Section, and they sought testimony from some people who would know what had happened. They reached out to several court security guards and other federal court employees, and they put all that information together to submit to a grand jury. Now the pressure was starting to mount. Those people knew Kathy McBroom. They'd give their side of the story, and the people that would be hearing that side of the story was the grand jury. Those are the people who had the power to charge the judge with serious crimes. When the grand jury in the Southern District of Texas heard all of that information, they indicted Judge Kent. Judge Kent was indicted on charges related to both of the assaults on Kathy McBroom, 2003 and 2007. He was indicted on 2 counts of abusive sexual conduct. He was indicted on 1 count of attempted aggravated sexual abuse. And he was indicted for obstruction of justice as well because he lied to the court during its investigation. Remember, he claimed that none of this ever happened. This was all going to come back to bite the judge hard. A criminal trial on this, it was going to be a spectacle. I mean, at this point, everybody knew what was going on. There was a heavy amount of press coverage. Demonstrators were gathering outside the courthouse where the trial was to take place. But just as his trial was getting started, it was over. In fact, it never happened. Because instead of facing the music inside the courtroom, Judge Kent made a deal with prosecutors. Judge Samuel B. Kent pled guilty. He pled guilty to felony obstruction of justice for claiming that he was innocent in all of this and lying to the court during their investigation. And in what must have felt like a symbolic victory for Kathy McBroom, Judge Kent admitted that he lied about harassing his staff. Of course, there was somewhat of an upside for the judge because if you heard about what he just pled guilty to, you probably noticed that there was nothing about the charges regarding sexual assault. Yeah, the prosecution dropped those charges. But the most likely reason is that they knew the judge was looking at some decent jail time. When a federal judge lies to a judicial inquiry, that's a big deal. Ultimately, Judge Kent was sentenced to almost 3 years in prison. The judge who imposed the sentence called Samuel B. Kent's conduct, quote, a stain on the judicial system itself. But Judge Samuel B. Kent was not going to ride off into the distance so easily. His plea deal didn't say anything about his job, and even after he admitted guilt, he refused to step down from the bench. Ultimately, that forced Congress to act. A few months after Judge Kent pled guilty, the U.S. House of Representatives impeached him. Their resolution stated that Judge Samuel B. Kent committed, quote, high crimes and misdemeanors. After formalizing the impeachment, the next step would be hearings, and that would be messy. Kathy McBroom was going to need to testify before Congress, and when she told her story, it was going to be lurid, nasty, and embarrassing to the judge and the judiciary. So just as he did before his criminal trial, Judge Kent made a deal with Congress right before the hearings were to start. In 2009, Judge Samuel B. Kent sent a letter to President Obama, formally resigning as a member of the federal judiciary. In the end, Judge Kent left an interesting legacy. He was the first federal judge to be charged with abusive sexual conduct and attempted aggravated sexual abuse, and the first federal judge impeached in 20 years. In future podcasts, you'll hear not just true lawyer crime, but more true judge crime. Thank you so much for listening, and don't forget to subscribe.